Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the damp grass of a medieval morning, the sun barely a rumor on the horizon, your boots soaked before breakfast. A falcon shifts on your gloved hand, feathers puffed against the chill, yellow eyes locked on a rabbit-shaped blur in the fog. You blink back sleep while the bird watches for movement. One of you is more alert than the other. Spoiler, it's not you. There's a castle behind you, already stirring with the clatter of servants, firewood snapping in hearths, and a noble lord who expects partridge or hare served with ceremony that you're about to deliver via airborne predator. No pressure. You probably won't survive this century, but hey, at least you've got a fancy bird and some cowhide wrapped around your forearm. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere far or weird, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always read them. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You tighten the jesses, the leather straps around your falcon's legs, and give a slight whistle. The bird doesn't move. It's not about obedience, it's about trust. This is a partnership, not pet ownership. A medieval falconer wasn't just a bird trainer. They were a sky whisperer, half butler, half bird wrangler, often one wrong talon away from unemployment. Your name is unknown. History rarely writes down the names of those holding the bird, only the ones watching from velvet cushions. But your role, absolutely essential. The day begins early. You were up before the servants. The falcon had to be hooded, weighed, inspected. You remember the old rule, a hungry bird hunts better. But not too hungry, or you get a desperate, dive-bombing feather cannon with no manners. The falcon shuffles, adjusting its wings slightly. You glance down, its tiny silver bells jingling with a soft, eerie cheer. Those bells? Practical. They help you hear the bird when it disappears into the tree line or the horizon. Sometimes, it's the only way to track it after a dive. Or after it decides it's had enough of you and goes full bird rogue. Falconers like you serve in households ranging from knightly manors to royal courts. And the hierarchy matters. Higher nobles preferred bigger birds, peregrines, sakers, or even the holy grail of hunting, the gerfalcon. You're probably handling a merlin or kestrel. Something appropriate for your station, which is somewhere between trusted servant and medieval flavor decor. You move through the field, your boots heavy with mud, scanning for prey. Rabbits. Maybe some quail. But the game's unpredictable. You learn to walk slow, to watch with the same patience the bird does. That's part of the rhythm of your life. Long, silent hours, punctuated by seconds of blur-feathered chaos. And when it happens, when the moment arrives, it's instant. You feel the subtle shift on your wrist, the tense jolt, the focus. Then, with a smooth, silent lift, the falcon launches. A flurry of wings, a whipping rush of air, and the bird disappears into the low mist. You run, yes, run, eyes skyward, heart in your throat, praying that the rabbit isn't faster, that the falcon doesn't clip a branch, that your lord is watching and nodding with vague approval. Then comes the cry. A strangled squeal. The falcon's struck. You find it crouched over its prize, wings half spread, guarding the kill. You approach slowly. Any sudden move could spook the bird, or earn you a fresh set of claw marks. With practiced hands, you trade meat for meat, offering a chunk of raw pigeon from your pouch in exchange for the catch. The bird steps back, not happy, but accepting. You slip a hood back over its eyes, calming the instinct to fly. This is the work no one sees, the awkward crouches, the bloody gloves, the long walks back. The noble gets the stew. You get a nod. Historians still argue whether falconers were truly respected or merely tolerated. Some manuscripts describe them as honored technicians. Others as eccentric servants who smelled faintly of feathers and regret. Back at the castle, you return the bird to its mews, a specialized wooden enclosure, and begin the second half of your job, cleaning. There's always cleaning. Droppings, old food, feathers. And if a feather looks wrong, frayed, cracked, dirty, you'll spend an hour fixing it with tiny wooden splints and goosefat glue. Quirky fact, falconers often carried feather repair kits like 14th century makeup bags. Some even had custom pouches sewn into their belts for broken quills. You plop onto a bench with your gloves still on, because they smell like death and you don't want that soaking into your skin. You rest your head against the wall and stare up at the ceiling. Another day gone. Another bird flown. Another prey delivered. And still, tomorrow waits. Your body aches. Your wrist is sore from bracing the bird all day, and there's a nasty scratch across your forearm from when it got spooked, which is falconer code for decided to reenact a sky battle with your arm. The Lord. He's currently eating your rabbit, not that he knows it came from you. You might get an extra crust of bread tonight. Or you might just get told to wake up even earlier. Still, you feel something close to pride. You were out there, walking the mist, talking to the sky, guiding a predator with a whistle and a stare. You made something wild do something purposeful. And in a world where most people never left the field they were born in, you stood with a bird and looked down at everything else. Just for a second. Just for a flight. You wake again before the sun, because of course you do. Your straw mattress hasn't exactly reinvented the concept of restful sleep, and a falcon's talons drumming softly against its perch don't exactly whisper lullabies. Your joints creak like an old barn door as you sit up. It's another morning of cold boots, colder water, and the unique pleasure of feeding a creature that could absolutely blind you if it felt sassy enough. Still, you get up, slip on your thick leather glove, and head to the mews. The falcon blinks at you with that same annoyed aristocratic stare it always gives, like it just caught you using the wrong salad fork. But deep down, you know it trusts you. At least, mostly. You've got something a lot of medieval folks don't. Proximity to power. That bird on your wrist. It's your ladder. Falconry isn't just a hobby, it's a social currency, one with feathers and a sharp beak. Nobles can't be seen fumbling with hoods or whistling the wrong tune. That's what you're for. And because falcons are temperamental divas with talons, they need someone who can keep them pampered and lethal at the same time. Over time, your job earns you something rare. Mobility. Not just physical, but social. You find yourself brushing sleeves with counts, barons, sometimes even royalty. They want the best hunts. The best hunts require the best birds. The best birds only respond to the falconer who trained them. That means you weren't born into velvet and silver. Maybe you were the son of a farmer, or a shepherd who got good at luring hawks from treetops. Maybe you were a boy with no inheritance and an eye for flight. One good bird and a lot of walking later, and you're standing in a hunting party next to the Duke's cousin, pretending you're not worried your bird might poop on her silk. That's how you climb the ladder, not through battles, but through birds. Historians still argue whether falconers were true members of the household or something more like high-end contractors. Some were listed alongside the Lord's personal physician or astrologer. Others were paid by the day, fed in the kitchen, and expected to leave when the hunting season ended. So your career path. A bit of a feathered gamble. Still, the perks are there. Better food than the peasants. Access to the Lord's stables, gardens, sometimes even wine. You hear court gossip before it becomes news. You know who's feuding with whom, who brought an imported gerfalcon from the icy north, and whose bird tried to eat the Duchess's lapdog at last week's outing. You say nothing, of course. Discretion is another tool on your belt. You also develop what we'll call falconer's charm. You learn how to talk just enough, nod just right, smile without showing teeth. You're never the center of the party, but you're always nearby, bird in hand, silent and competent. Nobles respect that. Mostly because they'd rather not lose a finger. Once, a visiting lord requests a private demonstration. You guide the falcon into a dive that slices the air like a thrown blade. The prey doesn't even squeak. The lord claps, says nothing more than good, and tosses you a silver coin. You tuck it away like a sacred relic. That's half a year's bread money, and your bird earned it in 5 seconds. Of course, with rising status comes rising risk. You're one mistake away from a very cold shoulder, or worse, being booted back to the pig pens. If your bird flies off and doesn't return, that's on you. If it scratches the wrong noble's hand, you're suddenly that clumsy falconer. Even if you did everything right, birds are birds. One bad flight, and your career gets clipped faster than a molting hawk. But if you can keep the birds alive, impressive and politically well-behaved, you start to notice the glances. Servants ask for tips. Young pages follow you around. You become the unofficial animal whisperer. And that leads to something weird in your world. Dignity. For someone not born noble, that's practically alchemy. Quirky fact. In some regions, falconers were allowed to dine at the Lord's table during hunt days, but had to remain standing. That's right, you could share the bread, but don't get too cozy. And definitely don't reach for the wine first. Hierarchy, after all, is more sacred than falconry. Still, you know how to play the game. You polish your boots. You comb your hair. You pick up the little details. Never interrupt a noble mid-boast, never mention that your bird once pooped on a priest's shoulder, even if it was hilarious, and never ever correct your lord's hunting facts, even when he says falcons can smell fear. You nod. You smile. You hold your bird. And bit by bit you rise. Sometimes a higher-ranking falconer leaves, dies, or, rarely, marries into a trade. That opens a post, and if you've been competent, clean, and quiet, you're in. Now you're overseeing multiple birds, managing apprentices, even advising on purchases. You start speaking in a tone people listen to. Your bird, once your only ally, becomes your calling card. Eventually, you might land a permanent post in a royal court. With that comes a salary, a chamber near the stables, and maybe even your own scribe to log hunts. Now you're no longer just the bird guy. You're Master Falconer. That title carries weight. But don't let the prestige fool you. You still wake before dawn. You still clean up guts. You still have to coo softly to a bird that could snap your finger like a twig. It's just now you do it while wearing nicer boots. That's the irony of upward mobility in medieval falconry. The better you get, the more people you answer to, and the more dangerous the mistakes become. But it's worth it. Because somewhere in that frozen field, as the fog lifts and the bird on your wrist shifts its weight, you feel something rare. You don't just serve the court. You command the sky. You're walking through the stables, which smell exactly how you'd expect. Hay, horse sweat, and the occasional misplaced bucket. The falcons don't stay here, of course. They have their own space, the mews. Think of it as the feathered equivalent of a studio apartment, where the rent is paid in raw rabbit and mutual toleration. The mews are quiet this morning. The birds are hooded, perched, their talons gripping the wooden bars with that eerie mix of grace and menace. You start your rounds like a medieval flight attendant, checking every bird for signs of stress, hunger, illness, or sass. Their hoods look decorative to the untrained eye, but you know better. Those leather caps are as functional as they are ceremonial. The darkness calms them. A hoodless falcon is a distracted falcon. A distracted falcon is a very expensive flying disaster. You unhood one carefully. She blinks at you, pupils tightening like shutters. You whisper nonsense, more for your benefit than hers. Your words are rhythm, sound, familiarity. She tilts her head. Is she listening? Debatable. But she tolerates you, which is pretty much love in falcon speak. Training these creatures isn't about domination. It's about psychology. You can't make a falcon do anything. You suggest. You reward. You observe. Over time, the bird begins to understand that returning to you means food. Staying with you means survival. It's not loyalty, it's strategy. Which, honestly, is kind of beautiful. Falconry training starts young, both for you and the bird. Most falconers begin as boys, apprenticed to a master who spends the first year making you do the fun jobs. Cleaning cages, catching mice, preparing food with knives that were last sharpened during the Crusades. But eventually, they let you hold the bird. That's the moment. When the weight hits your gloved hand, and you feel those eyes lock onto you like you're both threats and teammates. From there, it's hours in the field. You teach the bird to fly to your fist for food, to return at the sound of your whistle, to ignore distractions. You learn body language like a secret code. The slight ruffle of feathers before takeoff. The twitch of a tail that means impatience. And, most critically, the blank stare that says, "You've messed up, and now I'm going to the next village." Historians still argue whether falcons were truly trained, or if they simply tolerated humans long enough to be useful. The difference between a trained falcon and a temporarily cooperative one? Honestly, about 5 seconds of patience and a scrap of meat. Not every bird makes it. Some never bond. Some get injured. Some just disappear. That's part of the heartbreak in this profession. You can spend months building trust, only for one strong wind or curious squirrel to lure your falcon away forever. And still, you try again. Quirky little note for you: falconers had specialized vocabulary, an entire lexicon called terms of venery. A group of hawks isn't just a flock. No, it's a caste. When a falcon defecates, it's muting. And a falcon's dinner? That's her quarry. It's not pretension, it's survival. If you can't describe a bird's mood in 3 words or less, you're already behind. You leave the mews and step into the yard with one of the new birds. Young, restless, still testing your patience. You stretch out your arm, extend your whistle, and she flutters up, circles, then lands on the roof instead. You sigh. Classic. So you wait. That's part of the gig too. Just standing, arm outstretched, while a small, expensive predator pretends it doesn't hear you. There are worse jobs, sure, but very few that make you look this silly in front of royalty. Eventually, she swoops back. You reward her, not just with meat, but with a quiet nod. Tomorrow she'll land faster. Or she won't. You're playing a long game, one built on trust, timing, and a lot of standing in mud. And let's talk about mud. Medieval fields are not charming. They are soggy, uneven ankle traps with a grudge. You've twisted your knee more than once chasing down a hawk who thought it would be hilarious to land in the pig pen. Spoiler, it wasn't. Still, there are moments. Small, strange, brilliant ones. You see the morning sun reflect off the falcon's feathers like burnished copper. You watch a perfect dive from 200 feet, the bird folding its wings like an arrow, catching a mouse mid-leap. You hear the silence that comes after a clean catch, a hush that feels sacred. These moments are the reason you do this. Not the coin. Not the nods of approval. But the communion. The moment of connection between earth and sky, between human and wild. Between you, a dirt-streaked apprentice, and a bird who could take your eye out for looking at it wrong, but doesn't. You return the bird to its perch and note the day's progress in your little wax tablet. You record weight, behavior, response to the glove. Later, you'll report this to your superior, who will probably grunt and go back to brushing his favorite falcon with a feather duster. There's always hierarchy, even among falconers. But you're learning, rising. Every successful flight, every patient retrieval, every close call survived. You're not just training the bird. You're being shaped too, into something quieter, more observant. You start to hear wind differently. You begin to feel prey before you see it. You can tell the difference between a rabbit scuffle and a mole twitch with your eyes closed. That's not just experience. That's falconer's instinct. You end the day by hooding the birds again. One by one, you slip the soft leather over their eyes. They go still. It's a trust exercise. Every night, they let you take away their sight. Every morning, they let you give it back. There's something poetic about that. Something human. Something wild. You stretch your arms in the cold dawn and try not to yawn too loudly. Falcons, much like medieval nobles, hate being reminded that you're tired. Today is a hunt day. You can tell because the kitchen is already awake, stuffing satchels with roast meats and black bread, and someone just walked by wearing enough fur to make a taxidermist cry. The Lord wants a spectacle. That means you're up front, bird on wrist, all eyes on you and your feathery little colleague. The hunting party assembles with the usual flair. There's a hornblower who insists on practicing every 2 minutes. A line of horses snorting steam into the crisp morning air. Pages fuss over cloaks, hounds bark like they've just discovered sound, and the falconers, you and a few others, stand a bit apart, as always. Birds aren't great with chaos. And chaos is basically the medieval version of a lovely day out. You check your gear. Glove. Hood. Secure. Jesses. Those little leather straps on the falcon's ankles. Tied. Whistle. At your neck. Lure. Stuffed in your belt pouch like a meaty little secret. Everything has to be in place because once you're out there, in the open fields, it's not a drill. It's a dance. One where you're trying not to trip over your own boots while a bird with talons decides whether it respects you today. The Lord approaches, mounted on a horse that costs more than your childhood village. He nods at your falcon. "She's ready," he asks, though it's more a performance than a question. You nod back, resisting the urge to say something snarky like, "Well, she hasn't submitted her resignation yet." You just raise the bird slightly, like a living trophy, and she shifts her claws with practiced elegance. And off you all go, through thickets, over rolling hills, across muddy pastures. The hunt isn't just about food. It's about status. Falconry is called the sport of kings for a reason. To own a falcon is to flex gently and with feathers. The rarer the bird, the higher the flex. Gerfalcons? Oh, those are the Lamborghinis of the sky. But even a well-trained saker or peregrine can earn you a few gasps from guests who don't know a kestrel from a kettle. There's a rhythm to the hunt. You walk. The beaters stir up the underbrush. A hare bolts, or maybe a pigeon, if it's an especially lazy day. And you feel it, the tension in your bird. A tiny shiver, a silent scream of instinct. You release. The hood comes off. The falcon bursts into the air like a dropped arrow. And the world holds its breath. Falconry is not a guaranteed success. This isn't a video game. Sometimes the prey escapes. Sometimes the bird gets bored halfway through the chase. Sometimes it catches something and refuses to bring it back, settling into a tree to gloat like a little feathery narcissist. But sometimes, just sometimes, it's perfect. Your bird climbs, arcs, then folds into a dive. You hear the faint, sickening thud of impact. The prey crumples. The falcon lands beside it, mantling the kill with wings spread wide. She looks at you, as if to say, "That'll do, human." You run. Not dramatically, more of a strategic hustle. You approach slowly, murmuring softly so the bird doesn't think you're about to steal her lunch. You offer the lure, rich with reward meat. She releases the prey, hops to your glove, and starts eating. She trusts you, at least for now. Historians still argue whether falconers were expected to retrieve prey for the nobles, or whether nobles did it themselves as part of the ritual. Some records show lords scrambling after kills in their silk boots. Others suggest that was far too undignified and better left to, well, you. Quirky fact of the day: some noblewomen practiced falconry too, but with daintier birds like merlins or kestrels. One lady reportedly had a tiny hawk trained to snatch lace handkerchiefs out of the air, which is either adorable or terrifying, depending on your stance on airborne accessory theft. Back to your hunt. The Lord is pleased. He gestures for you to approach and inspect the kill. You hold it up, still warm, fur-slicked with dew, and nod. It's a good catch. The falcon earned her moment. So did you. The party continues. More birds, more flights, more muddy boots. Occasionally, a falcon disappears into the trees, and you have to pretend you're not quietly panicking while everyone else snacks on cheese wheels. You whistle, swing the lure, and hope she hasn't decided to elope with a local owl. Eventually, your bird returns. You exhale with all the dignity of a man who just narrowly avoided unemployment by feathered betrayal. The hunt ends at dusk. Everyone's tired, hungry, and already embellishing their stories. The Lord insists his falcon dove like lightning, even though you clearly saw it overshoot by 5 feet. But who are you to correct the man who pays you? You smile. You nod. You casually wipe blood off your glove and tuck the bird into her travel hood. Back at the estate, servants unload the horses. The mews are lit by low lanterns. You clean the birds gently, brush out feathers, and check for injuries. You murmur again, always murmuring. The words don't matter. The tone does. There's a quiet satisfaction in this end-of-day ritual. The birds fed, the nobles happy, the sun bleeding out behind the trees. You survived another hunt. And more importantly, so did your falcon. That's not nothing. You jot a few notes onto your tablet. Clean flight. Good pursuit. Slight delay on return. Possibly distracted by squirrels. You'll have to work on that. A page brings you a leftover hunk of meat pie, lukewarm, but better than the gruel from last week. You eat it standing, leaning against the mews, sharing the moment with the owls and falcons tucked into their perches. This, too, is falconry. Not just the soaring flights or noble applause, but the quiet after. The whispered check-ins. The blood under your nails and the pride in your chest. You glance at your bird. She blinks slowly, eyes gleaming in the lantern glow. Tomorrow, you'll do it all again. You wake before the light does, because falcons, and by extension, falconers, don't sleep in. Ever. Your joints crack like cheap furniture as you swing your legs off the straw-stuffed mattress. The mews are already murmuring. A soft rustle of feathers. A sleepy click of a beak. One falcon lets out a low, disapproving scree like it just read your thoughts. Today isn't a hunt. No horses, no noble applause, no tripping over lords' egos or muddy boots. Today is maintenance. Cleaning, mending, feather checking, parasite hunting joy. It's not glamorous, but neither is being a squire's laundry bucket, so you don't complain too much. You start by unlatching the mew doors one by one. The birds stay put, hoods still on, calm in their velvet darkness. You always move in the same order, left to right. Falcons like routines. So do you, if you're honest. Something about repetition keeps the chaos away. You begin with the perches. Scraping off the mutes. Remember that charming falconer term for poop? With a special little wooden tool that's part knife, part tiny shovel. You've learned to do this without flinching. Without inhaling too deeply. Without crying. Usually. Next comes the inventory check. Hoods, jesses, leashes, swivels. All made of leather that needs oiling, sewing, or, in the case of one leash that was suspiciously chewed through last week, total replacement. You sit cross-legged with your repair kit like a medieval shoemaker, stitching in the faint morning light while a falcon watches from her perch like she's judging your thread tension. There's always something breaking. A tassel frays. A glove starts to wear thin. Your left boot leaks. You fix what you can. You improvise the rest. Falconers are part bird wrangler, part leatherworker, part therapist, and a surprising amount janitor. And while you stitch and scrape, you listen. Not just to the birds, but to the estate around you. Voices rising in the kitchen. Bells tolling the hour. The slap of buckets at the well. Occasionally, the sharp bark of a hunting dog who still thinks he's in charge. All part of the background hum of life in a medieval estate, where everything is always too loud, too early, and somehow never where you left it. Today you're also trimming a few feathers. It's called imping, and it's not as violent as it sounds. You use tiny splints and glue, yes, medieval glue, to repair damaged wing feathers with donor pieces. Kind of like falcon feather prosthetics. If you do it right, the bird won't even notice. If you mess it up, she'll spiral mid-flight and make a very loud statement about your incompetence in front of someone titled Baron of something unpronounceable. You hold her gently, gloves still on, while another falconer assists. She clicks her beak once, a little warning. You whisper again. You're always whispering. Just a quick repair, my lady. You'll be airborne by lunch. She blinks. It's possible she understands sarcasm. You wouldn't put it past her. Historians still argue whether falconers truly loved their birds or simply valued them as tools of their trade. The lines blur. It's hard not to feel something for a creature that relies on you so much and returns so little affection, kind of like raising a teenager with claws. By mid-morning, your hands are sore from stitching and cleaning, but you're not done. You've got to prepare the mews for molting season. Oh yes, falcons shed. Not all at once, that would be terrifying, but gradually, over weeks. You line the perches with extra padding, place fresh straw in corners, and double-check the roof for leaks. Wet feathers plus drafty windows equals one very grumpy bird and several days of pretending you don't hear the steward asking if your falcons are broken. You also rotate a few of the birds out to the weathering yard. It's basically falcon recess, a secure outdoor area where they can sit, hooded, and enjoy the fresh air. Think spa day meets sensory deprivation. You stake them to short perches, spaced far enough that they can't lunge at each other. Falcons are solitary, moody introverts. Sound familiar? Quirky historical tidbit. Some medieval estates actually built ornate, enclosed falconry gardens for their birds to weather in style. Topiary. Fountains. Even miniature mews with fancy decorations. It was less about the birds and more about making visiting nobles gasp. One surviving record describes a falcon rotunda with stone perches and painted ceilings. Yes, someone once commissioned frescoes for hawks. You don't have a rotunda. You have mud, rope, and a stubborn kestrel that keeps trying to unclip her own jesses. You gently distract her with a morsel of quail. She takes it, then gives you a look like you've insulted her lineage. Back inside, you sort through feed. You've got to prep the day's meals, gutting, portioning, weighing. Falcon appetites are fickle. Too much food, and they fly lazily. Too little, and they get hangry, which in falcon terms means will bite your nose without warning. You aim for balance, just enough mouse to keep her motivated, not enough to make her think she can take on a deer. There's an old superstition among falconers: never whistle while preparing feed. Supposedly it offends the birds, or confuses them, or invites misfortune. Honestly, it might just be because whistling while handling dead pigeon bits is unsettling. You skip the whistling. The afternoon passes in its usual blur of repairs, feather smoothing, and quietly scolding a young apprentice for leaving a hood too loose. You remember being that kid. Nervous, excited, constantly dodging falcon poop and accidentally offending high-ranking birds. One time, you dropped a lure in front of a viscount. He never let you forget it. Called you lure boy for 3 years. Now you're the one teaching. Sort of. Guiding. Nudging. Grunting when someone ties a knot too tight or holds a bird like it's made of glass. You don't say much. You don't need to. The birds do the talking. You end the day where you started, in the mews, lantern lit, the last rays of sun bleeding through the slats. You perch one final bird, tighten the jesses, check the hood. She's breathing slow. You're breathing slower. There's something sacred about this quiet. The kind of stillness that comes not from silence, but from rhythm. From doing something over and over until it becomes part of your body. Falconry isn't loud. It's steady. And tomorrow, it begins again. Your muscles complain in the morning, but your feet don't get a vote. You've got a summons. Not from the falcons, though one does flap dramatically at you like an actor in a very bird-centric Shakespeare play, but from someone even more prone to preening, the noble lord of the estate himself. Which, let's be clear, is not your favorite way to start a day. You pull on your best tunic, not the one with the mysterious hawk-shaped burn hole, and try to flatten your hair into something that doesn't scream, slept in hay. The steward meets you halfway to the hall, his expression somewhere between, "You're late," and, "I hope you remembered to clean under your nails." The lord is seated beneath a tapestry so large and busy it could double as a medieval magic eye puzzle. He's flanked by retainers, advisors, and a dog who may or may not be asleep. The air smells of wax, roast meat, and that faint whiff of politics. He's smiling, which is never a good sign. Turns out, there's a guest arriving, some minor duke or bishop or extremely important someone who insists on seeing a falconry display. You nod, as if that doesn't instantly rearrange your whole week. That means prepping a hunt, wrangling more than one bird, and worst of all, working with the court entertainers. You've seen the jugglers. They juggle flaming things. Your falcons hate flaming things. But you bow, thank him, and back away before anyone asks you to stay for lunch and awkward conversation. You'll need every minute. Back in the mews, you inform the birds. Not that they respond. One screeches. One ruffles her feathers in what could be disapproval or a mild draft. You'll take that as a yes. So the next few days are full rehearsal mode. You prep your top birds, the crowd pleasers. The fast ones, the ones with dramatic plumage. The showboats. There's one in particular, a gerfalcon with a wingspan like a dining table, who always makes the crowd gasp. You've seen her dive from 30 meters and pluck a tethered lure out of the air like she's solving a puzzle. You start with basic flights, launching from the glove, swooping low, returning clean. Each move practiced, each motion smoothed. You reward with meat, always the good stuff. No tough rabbit bits today. Just tender, juicy, falcon-approved delicacies. You're basically running a Michelin-starred training camp. Of course, things don't always go smoothly. During one flight, a kestrel decides she's had enough and flies straight to the chimney. Lands. Preens. Refuses to move. You try to coax her down with food, whistling, threats, and a song you make up on the spot about how delightful her feathers look in the sun. She blinks at you, completely unmoved. Falconers throughout history have dealt with this. Birds that go rogue. That ignore commands. That decide to investigate a windmill mid-hunt. Historians still argue whether falcons truly bond with their handlers or merely tolerate them as food dispensers. Either way, you spend a solid hour talking to a bird on a roof. Your apprentice snickers. You resist the urge to assign chimney duty. Once she's down and back in the mews, after only moderate humiliation, you move on to costuming. Not for you, of course. But your falcons need to look impeccable. That means polishing the bells, brushing the feathers, and giving their hoods a little extra care. There's a superstition that a bird's mood can be improved by buffing its equipment until it gleams. Superstition, sure. But your lord believes it, and his purse controls your meal ticket. Speaking of equipment, you double-check every last item. Lures, gloves, spares of both. You even retie the knots on the leash just to feel productive. There's something comforting in the ritual, like making tea, but with more risk of blood loss. And then comes the day. You arrive at the fields just past dawn. The Lord's entourage is already assembling. Tents are pitched. Velvet is involved. A bard is tuning something stringed and delicate nearby. You suspect he's composing a ballad about himself. Your birds are calm, hooded, patient, or maybe just tired. You know the feeling. The noble guest finally arrives. He's wide-shouldered, heavily perfumed, and wearing what appears to be a small ferret around his neck. He nods politely. A hawk hisses. You almost applaud. With a whistle and a signal, you launch your first bird. The crowd watches as she rises, curves, and dives on command, snatching the lure from the air like a streak of brown lightning. Murmurs of approval. Even the bard pauses. You keep them coming, one after another. A mix of size and style. Each flight carefully orchestrated to look effortless. Behind the scenes, you're sweating through layers, twitching at every gust of wind, every shift in the falcon's wings. But on the outside, you're calm, dignified, slightly muddy. And then it happens. A wild hare darts across the field, clearly unaware it's entered a medieval airshow. One falcon sees it and peels off script. She dives. Spectacularly. Absolutely ignoring the lure, the audience, and centuries of etiquette. Everyone gasps. She misses the hare, of course. But it's enough drama for the crowd to erupt into delighted applause. The lord laughs. The guest claps. The bard starts humming something vaguely heroic. You pretend it was all part of the plan. Quirky tidbit. In some courts, falconers received tips directly from impressed guests. You're handed a pouch afterward. You don't check it until you're alone, but it jingles. You allow yourself one tiny, smug nod. Back at the mews that evening, you release your birds one by one. Remove hoods. Untie jesses. Murmur your thanks like a bedtime ritual. One nips at your glove. You take it as affection. Sort of. The adrenaline fades, replaced by the delicious ache of a job completed. Not perfect, but impressive. And no one lost a finger. Always a plus. You settle in on your stool, legs stretched, as your apprentice brushes down the equipment. He's humming the bard's tune. You tell him to stop. He does not. You close your eyes, just for a second. And somewhere outside, a falcon calls into the night like she owns it. She kind of does. Your dreams are full of feathers. Swooping shapes that dip and glide, then blur into muddy paths and misbehaving noblemen. When you finally wake, it's with your hood half over your eyes and a kestrel judging you from her perch. Not your proudest look. But no rest for the bird whisperer. Today, you've been summoned for something more mundane, though, knowing your lord, there's always a theatrical twist. You're due to perform a different duty of the falconer. Matchmaking. No, not between nobles. Between birds. Yes, falcons need romantic partners too. And when two of your prized females begin screeching at each other over perch space, your lord decides it's time to introduce a male or two and let nature sort itself out. You sigh, grab a bride pouch of quail giblets, and get to work. Historically speaking, the falconer's job wasn't just about training and theatrics. In many estates, they acted as breeders too, pairing birds, managing clutches, and overseeing nesting seasons. Some even kept detailed records, scribbled in ink and grease, tracking bloodlines with more care than certain royal families tracked their own. You usher one of your tiercels, a smaller male falcon, all pride and posturing, into the introduction cage. He puffs himself up immediately, flicking wings and making that weird throat sound that's halfway between flirtation and a battle cry. The female responds by absolutely ignoring him. You've seen medieval romances move faster. Still, you wait. Patiently. Slowly. You've got time. And gloves. Here's a fun fringe fact. In certain European courts, there were rumors that singing to falcons helped with breeding. Entire ballads were penned just for this awkward phase of avian courtship. You consider humming. You decide against it. The birds are already judging you enough. Eventually, there's a bit of progress. The two settle near each other. No shrieking. No flying talons. That's basically love, falcon style. You offer them privacy and back away. Of course, with falcons, nothing is guaranteed. Historians still argue whether medieval falconers truly understood the nuances of breeding or just got lucky with proximity and meat bribes. Some say there were secret techniques passed down only through whispered apprenticeships. Others argue it was just bird pheromones and hope. Later that day, as you're recording the bird's behavior in a leather-bound log that still smells faintly of sheep, your apprentice asks a very irritating question. So, what happens to the chicks? You pause. Because that's where things get political. In some courts, falcon chicks were considered noble assets. They might be gifted to visiting dignitaries, sold to fund minor wars, or even trained up for the next generation of aerial entertainment. Some were raised alongside royal children. Some ended up in monasteries, cared for by bird-obsessed monks who had nothing but time and parchment. You, however, will probably just have to hand them off to the steward and hope they don't get assigned to someone who thinks hawks eat breadcrumbs. The apprentice isn't satisfied with this answer, of course. He wants details. You tell him to clean the kestrel's perch and think about his choices in life. In the meantime, your lord has another bright idea. He's heard that falcon feathers make excellent writing quills and insists you collect some. You try to explain that the best writing quills actually come from geese, but he waves you off. Falcons are more prestigious, apparently, even if they cost twice as much in snap at anyone who touches their tail. So now you're plucking discarded feathers and examining them for spine, curve, and durability. You find one that looks promising, glossy, stiff, and just the right length. You dip it in ink, try a few strokes. Not bad. Until the ink splatters on your tunic and the kestrel tries to eat the feather mid-sentence. Naturally. Some medieval scribes swore by falcon feather quills. Others found them too stiff or too precious to waste on everyday script. There's an entire school of thought, still debated in musty academic journals, about whether ceremonial documents were written with noble bird feathers as a kind of power symbol. Honestly, if you had to sign a treaty and had the option between goose quill and plume of apex predator, you'd probably choose the one with talon cred. By the time you're done sorting feathers, bribing tiercels, and dodging another noble child who wants to pet the murder pigeon, the sun is setting. Again. You lose track of how many days slip by like this. Feathers, flight drills, feeding routines, court politics. Falconry is half glamour, half bird poop. You make your rounds in the mews, checking each bird, adjusting the jesses, whispering to the ones who get nervous in storms. Yes, you whisper. You're not proud of it, but it works. There's a rumor in falconer circles, probably started by someone drunk on cider, that some handlers shared dreams with their birds. That after years of bonding, your subconsciouses aligned. You dreamed of the sky, of hunting, of sharp talons curling into fur. You think about that a lot. Then your apprentice drops something loudly, and the kestrel screeches, and you remember that reality is full of clumsiness. You sigh. Refill the water dishes. Muck out one particularly dramatic bird's perch. He waits until you're close, then poops triumphantly. You nod in mock respect. Back in your quarters, you peel off your tunic and stretch. There's a sharp ache between your shoulders from holding the glove all day. The kind of ache you grow fond of, weirdly. Like a reminder you're needed. You eat your dinner by the fire. Barley stew, dense bread, and one slightly confused pickled onion. You stare into the flames and think about your birds. One day, one of those chicks will grow up. Maybe it'll fly in a royal hunt. Maybe it'll end up in some scholar's dusty treatise. Maybe, just maybe, it'll be remembered longer than you. That's all right. You're used to being in the background. After all, falcons shine brightest when you let them. And tomorrow, it starts again. You'll greet the birds. Adjust the jesses. Nudge another male into an awkward courtship dance. Maybe sing to him. Maybe not. Depends on how much judgment you can handle from a raptor. The moon hangs low over the rooftops when you're woken by a knock on your wooden door. Slow, deliberate, and always bad news. You drag yourself out of your half-warm blanket, stub your toe on your trunk again, and open the door to find a damp page boy with wild hair and wide eyes. Your lordship needs you. Urgently. One of the birds is gone. Just what you needed. You throw on your cloak, still damp from yesterday's drizzle, and trudge to the mews in the torchlight, feeling like some kind of medieval detective with feathers instead of clues. The Lord himself is already pacing beside the cages, looking entirely too awake for this hour. "It's the gerfalcon," he says through clenched teeth. "The white one. Of course it is. The most expensive bird in the entire collection. Not the mildly irritable kestrel or the lazy buzzard. No, it's the prized northern import that eats better than the scullery maid." You take a deep breath and assess the scene. One open latch. No blood. No broken feathers. Just a clean escape. You'd almost admire her if your job didn't depend on her coming back. You light a lantern and search the nearby trees, calling softly. There's a method to this madness. Each bird knows your voice, even if they pretend not to. Especially at 2 a.m. And there she is, silhouetted against the moon, perched like royalty on a branch above the chapel. You know better than to spook her. You raise your glove. Quiet. Still. A whisper of meat in your palm. She hesitates, fluffs her feathers, then glides down with calculated grace and lands with a faint thump. The Lord watches, slack-jawed. You hand her over with the same calm you'd offer someone a cup of tea. Inside, you're sweating like a medieval baker. In the days that follow, the incident becomes legend around the estate. The time the prized gerfalcon went on a moonlit joyride. The time the falconer summoned her like a feathery ghost whisperer. Your apprentice starts referring to you as the bird wizard, which you try and fail to discourage. Still, the gerfalcon's rebellion reminds you of a deeper reality. Falconry was never just about training. It was about trust. Unlike dogs or horses, birds of prey can't be tamed in the traditional sense. They choose to work with you, if they feel like it. That's why falconers in medieval times often had an almost spiritual reputation. They didn't control their birds. They cooperated, or negotiated, or bribed with mice. There's a delightful fringe tale that in some monastic communities, falconers were forbidden from speaking to their birds during Lent, which led to a glorious loophole. Monks would instead hum, whistle, or write messages on small scrolls tucked in their sleeves. No talking, just interpretive performance. You consider this while watching your apprentice attempt to mime a flight command to the kestrel. It's not going well. She responds by flying straight into a barrel. Elegant. Meanwhile, your lord has caught falcon fever again. He's ordered a new hood for the gerfalcon, something embroidered with gold thread and maybe some pearls. Because that's exactly what an apex predator needs. Fashion. Falcon hoods, of course, were a vital part of the toolkit. They kept birds calm by blocking their vision, helped them rest during transport, and, if you were wealthy enough, doubled as little status hats. Historians still argue whether the over-decorated hoods actually helped or just made the bird angrier. There's a charming illustration in one manuscript where a hooded falcon is clearly side-eyeing the artist. You spend the afternoon adjusting hood straps and inspecting the new delivery. The gold thread's pretty, sure, but the fit is off. Too tight around the beak. You make a note to fix it yourself, again. Tailors rarely understand that birds actually need to breathe. Your apprentice wanders over, holding a broken bell. "This fell off the peregrine," he mumbles. You raise an eyebrow. He adds, "I think she stepped on it." That's improbable, but not impossible. Falcon bells, usually tied to the bird's legs, were another essential piece of the ensemble. Not just decorative, though they did often sparkle with bronze and silver, but functional. You could hear your bird even when it disappeared into a distant field or up into the clouds chasing a squirrel it probably wasn't supposed to. There's one theory that some birds actually learned to fly more quietly just to ditch the bells and get a moment's peace. You believe it. You've seen that glint in a hawk's eye when she shakes her foot just so. You patch the bell, reattach it with a fresh anklet, and whisper something encouraging to the peregrine. She blinks once, which could mean anything from thanks to you're on borrowed time. Honestly, with birds of prey, it's usually both. Later that evening, you sit by the fire with a battered old falconer's manual. It smells like ash and mold and ambition. You flip through sketches of jesses, diagrams of wing measurements, and some very unhelpful poetry about feather care. One entry catches your eye. If a falcon does not return, the fault lies not in her nature, but in thine conduct. That's fair. And vaguely threatening. The quiet stretches long. Outside, an owl hoots. Inside, your apprentice snores softly in the corner, half buried under a fur blanket and probably dreaming about being chased by kestrels. You don't get many quiet moments, but when you do, you reflect on the oddness of your position. In medieval society, falconers occupied this strange, wobbly rung on the social ladder. Trusted with valuable animals. Allowed in noble company. But still servants. Not quite commoners, not quite courtiers. Somewhere in the middle, like the birds themselves, wild, but wearing tethers. You're not sure where you'd fit without the birds. But thankfully, you don't have to answer that tonight. Your eyes start to drift closed as the fire settles into coals. You dream of feathers, yes, but also of bells, gold-threaded hoods, and the soft thud of talons on your glove in the moonlight. The morning sun slices through the thin cloth of your shutters, and you're roused not by birdsong, but by an extremely persistent goose. You rub your face and rise slowly, wondering why you, a fully trained falconer, still sleep within earshot of barnyard poultry. Life has its mysteries. You head out to the mews, still stretching, and find your apprentice wrestling with a tangled mess of jesses. One leather strap is wrapped entirely around his wrist. The other is mysteriously knotted around his belt. The hawk in question stares at him with the blank judgment of a predator considering its odds. You intervene with a yawn and a snip of your dagger. You're lucky she didn't just eat your sleeve, you mumble. Once the bird is safely perched, you walk the perimeter of the mews, inspecting each enclosure. The gerfalcon is still preening like a narcissist in a mirror. The kestrel is sulking under a branch. The buzzard appears to be napping while standing, which, honestly, is impressive. But it's the peregrine who stares at you, unblinking, as if she knows what's coming today. Today, you're going to court. Not in the romantic sense. And not for a crime, though your record with pigeon fatalities might suggest otherwise. No, today your services have been requested at the noble court for a falconry display. You're to parade your birds, demonstrate your control, and act as if this job doesn't occasionally involve being pooped on by royalty. You dress in your best tunic, the one that doesn't have blood or feathers stuck to it, miraculously, and pack your falconing gear. Hoods, jesses, meat pouch, backup glove, bells, and that small wooden perch your birds pretend not to hate. The court is bustling by the time you arrive. Pages run in all directions like caffeinated ants. Perfumed nobles sweep through the halls in layers of velvet that could smother a grown man. You are ushered to the gardens, which are pristine, geometrically trimmed, and, quite possibly, allergic to nature. Your audience today includes a visiting duke, 3 bishops, and someone who may or may not be a poet. The lord who employs you stands tall and proud, announcing your arrival with unnecessary flair. And so it begins. The birds perform decently. The kestrel executes a clean hover, dives, and returns with a flap that's only slightly dramatic. The buzzard, well, he waddles instead of flying and then sits on a hedge, but the audience finds him charming. The peregrine, as always, refuses to show off unless absolutely necessary. You make it necessary by whispering something you probably shouldn't repeat in front of the bishops. She launches, streaks across the sky like a feathered dart, and nails a fake lure midair. Someone claps. Someone faints. Possibly the poet. Falconry displays were no small matter in medieval courts. They weren't just entertainment. They were demonstrations of wealth, power, and sophistication. To fly a trained bird before royalty was to showcase discipline, control over nature, and the subtle message, "My land is so secure, I have time for birds." Your performance goes well. At least, no one gets clawed and nothing explodes. Afterward, you're offered a seat at the lesser banquet table, somewhere between the steward and the harpist. You eat slowly, politely, while the conversation drifts around you like fog. Someone asks if birds have souls. Someone else argues that falcons are secretly divine messengers. Someone else, notably drunk, swears he saw a hawk write its own name in the sky. Historians still argue whether these displays were more about the birds or the falconers. Some records praise the handlers for their skill and loyalty. Others don't even name them, focusing entirely on the nobleman who owns the birds. You're a silent technician in this ballet, invisible unless something goes wrong. One chronicle even tells of a falconer who became so admired for his showmanship that he was gifted a silver perch and invited to dine with the king. Though, predictably, the tale ends with the bird stealing the king's crown and the falconer being exiled to Wales. You stay out of trouble. As the banquet winds down, a squire approaches with a question from the poet, who is apparently still in awe. He asks if you write your birds poems. You blink. Only limericks, you answer, deadpan. He nods as if this is completely reasonable. Back at the mews, long after the court has tired of birds and wine, you remove the bells and hoods with practiced care. Each bird gets a tidbit of meat and a moment of quiet. The peregrine nips your glove, not out of anger, but maybe a little smug pride. She knows she stole the show. You sit outside the mews, watching the stars blink into view. For all its drama, the court had a certain rhythm, a protocol. Here in the dark, with straw under your boots and owl calls echoing, it's quieter, truer. You think about the stories falconers pass down, not the big, noble ones, but the secret ones. The tale of the hawk that flew off with a lady's wig. The rumor of a royal kestrel who refused to eat unless sung to. The apprentice who claimed a bird whispered secrets in Latin. Most are nonsense. Some might not be. Tomorrow will be routine again. Cleaning, feeding, checking claws and feathers, mediating kestrel-buzzard conflicts like a feathered marriage counselor. But tonight, you've stood in the royal gardens, glove raised high, and reminded everyone that there's magic in a shadow slicing the sky. Your apprentice joins you with 2 mugs of cider, one for you, one for himself. He raises his in salute. They'll talk about the peregrine for weeks, he says. You nod, sipping slowly. They'd better. And somewhere above, unseen in the dark, a pair of wings glide silently, keeping watch. You're halfway through trimming the talons of a very twitchy merlin when the steward arrives, breathless, red-faced, and carrying a scroll like it's on fire. He announces, between gasps, that the falconer from the next estate over has fallen ill. The lord of that manor requires, your assistance. You sigh, set down the clippers, and gently recoax the merlin back into her perch before she attempts to bite your ear off in retaliation. Time to play traveling falcon consultant, because apparently you're now the medieval equivalent of a bird whisperer/emergency freelancer. You pack lightly but thoroughly, travel hood for each bird, spare anklets, a leather satchel of dried meat, and a small flask of ale. The apprentice begs to come along. You say no. Then he offers to clean the buzzard enclosure in exchange. You immediately say yes. Sometimes it pays to delegate. The next estate is half a day's ride through muddy, squirrel-infested woods. You bounce in the saddle, trying not to jostle the transport cages too much while your horse actively tries to unseat you at every root and puddle. By the time you arrive, your back feels like it's been kneaded by angry badgers. The estate is grander than expected. Stone towers, gilded window frames, and a moat wide enough to make eye contact with fish. The falconer here, a man named Osric, is indeed unwell. He greets you with a blanket over his shoulders and a cough like rusted hinges. Watch out for the red-tailed hawk, he rasps. She bites when bored. Noted. You step into the mews, which smells like dried feathers, damp straw, and mild chaos. Birds shriek from every direction. A kestrel has somehow gotten its jesses wrapped around a perch, and one of the hoods is clearly on backward. You don't judge. Okay, you do judge. But silently and with compassion. You start by calming the birds one by one, checking their conditions, making notes. The red-tailed hawk does, in fact, try to take a chunk out of your glove. You offer her a strip of rabbit instead, and she glares before accepting. You admire the commitment to the bit. Here, you're reminded how varied the career paths of falconers could be. Some stayed bound to one estate for life, loyal, immobile, part of the architecture. Others, like yourself today, were pulled into temporary service, traveling experts called upon in times of falcon crisis. These itinerant falconers were few, but vital. A sort of avian cavalry. The birds on this estate aren't poorly trained, but they're understimulated. Too much confinement, not enough flight. Falcons are like noble children. They misbehave when bored. You recommend a shift in feeding routine, a new system of perches with varied height, and at least one daily flight drill. The steward nods furiously and begins scribbling like his life depends on it. You notice a curious object on a workbench, a small bronze cylinder etched with runes. "It's the hawk charm," Osric croaks from his blanket cocoon. "Old superstition. Supposed to keep the birds loyal." You turn it over in your hand. It smells faintly of myrrh and bird droppings. Charming indeed. Historians still argue whether such charms had any practical use, or were just medieval fidget toys for anxious falconers. Some records suggest that charms were buried under mews to bless the birds, or that dried hawk droppings were once considered good luck in tournaments. You're not convinced. But hey, if it keeps Osric from sneezing on you again, you'll allow the tradition. After lunch, stale bread, strong cheese, and ale that tastes like barley's final cry, you're asked to perform a short demonstration for the estate's lady. She arrives with a cluster of handmaidens, all whispering and shielding themselves from imagined bird attacks with fans. You select a cooperative goshawk for the task. She's older, but sharp as ever. With a smooth flick of your glove, you send her into flight, looping once over the hedges before returning with grace. The lady claps. One of the handmaidens nearly faints. Another, bolder one, asks if she can try. You hesitate, then relent. You secure the glove on her wrist, guide her stance, and whisper the release. The goshawk hesitates, clearly unimpressed, then lifts into the air with a thundering flap. The girl gasps, thrilled, and the handmaidens squeal like they've just witnessed a miracle. Afterward, you offer her a small feather as a token. She tucks it behind her ear and asks if falconers always look so serious. You say, "Only when underpaid." She laughs. You maintain a straight face, but your inner monologue is doing a victory lap. That evening, Osric insists on sharing one of his oldest bird stories. "There was a merlin once," he begins, "who vanished for a year. Gone. Thought she was dead. Then one morning, same perch, same glove, she returned. Fat as a merchant, calm as a monk." You nod politely. "So, she took a sabbatical?" He laughs so hard he nearly coughs up a lung. There's no shortage of quirky bird tales in your profession. One traveling falconer swore he had a hawk who refused to fly on Sundays. Another claimed a kestrel once mimicked his sneeze. You suspect some are half true, some fully made up, and some just misunderstood bird behavior rebranded as magic. You sleep that night in the guest loft above the stables, lulled by the occasional hoot and the suspicious creaking of mice with ambitious goals. The stars outside flicker through slats in the roof. You wonder if the birds dream of skies or hunts or simply silence. At dawn, you prep to leave. Osric, looking marginally less like death in a blanket, thanks you with a firm handshake and a small pouch of coins. "For your trouble," he says, "and your patience." You return the favor with one of your homemade jest-tying guides, annotated with drawings that are part instructional, part sarcastic. He laughs again. "Come back any time. Or send that apprentice of yours. He'll do just fine." You mount your horse, cage strapped behind, and begin the ride home. The forest is quieter this time. You think about how many falconers you've met, stationary and wandering, scholarly and scrappy, humble and dramatic. And you wonder if one day, someone will tell your story to the next tired traveler. For now, though, you settle into the rhythm of hoofbeats and the occasional offended squirrel. Ahead lies your muse, your birds, and your apprentice, who hopefully hasn't set anything on fire in your absence. When you finally trudge back through your estate's wooden gate, the first thing that greets you is a familiar screech, not of welcome, but more of protest. You glance up. Ah yes, your sharp-eyed peregrine is sulking on her perch like you just left her for an entire season of bad weather. She flaps once, twice, then turns her back in a theatrical display of disapproval. "Nice to see you too," you mutter, unloading the cages. Your apprentice rushes over, visibly proud, face smudged with what may be either soot or hawk droppings. You don't ask. "Nothing burned down," he announces. "Mostly." He then quickly gestures to a slightly singed edge of the wooden workbench and adds, "The candle got away from me, but the buzzard screamed, so I put it out. There's probably a lesson in there, but you're too tired to fish it out." You just nod, toss him an apple, and go inspect the mews. Everything seems mostly in order. A few perches have been re-roped, sloppily, but with enthusiasm. Some of the smaller falcons are overfed, while one poor kestrel looks like he missed lunch twice. You shake your head, offer him a double portion, and add a note to give the apprentice remedial feeding lessons. With puppets, if necessary. Your return is timely. Within a few days, messengers arrive from a distant holding with a curious request. They're preparing for a falconry tournament, and your reputation, thanks to one overly chatty steward and a handmaiden's feather story, has traveled. Would you consider consulting? You grumble something about, not again, but accept anyway. This time, though, you bring the apprentice. Think of it as work experience, or penance for overfeeding that poor kestrel. The tournament estate is nestled on a misty hill surrounded by forest. Banners flap lazily in the breeze, all heraldic symbols and embroidered hawks with dramatically flared wings. Knights polish armor, ladies rehearse their best tournament gasps, and falconers, oh so many falconers, sharpen their gear and show off their birds like nervous pageant moms. You meet falconers from all corners, some noble, some common, all slightly obsessed. One proudly claims his gerfalcon once snatched a hare mid-sneeze. Another has a hawk with 3 tail feathers dyed blue, for morale. Your apprentice whispers, "Why blue?" You whisper back, "Because red would clash with the sash." He nods, solemn. There's a strange camaraderie here, forged through shared scratches, long hours, and the eternal struggle of poop stains that no vinegar can defeat. You exchange techniques, trade small tools, and swap outrageous bird tales. One lady falconer insists she trained her kestrel to respond to her husband's name, just to confuse the servants. Somewhere between the flag-waving and falcon lunging, it becomes clear that this tournament is more spectacle than skill. Lords wager absurd sums on which bird will dive fastest, ladies gift ribbons to favored falconers, and the audience treats it all like a feathery joust. Historians still argue whether such falconry contests were genuine skill tests or just another excuse for aristocratic showing off. Records describe precise scoring and elaborate prizes, gold, land, or even entire birds, but other accounts focus more on the drinking afterward. Naturally, you're asked to judge one event, which mostly involves nodding gravely while birds chase lures in looping circles. One unfortunate noble's falcon flies in the complete opposite direction and ends up perched on the tournament roast. The crowd loves it. The noble, less so. The apprentice, meanwhile, makes fast friends with a squire named Aldrich, who shares his love for weird bird facts and dubious cartwheels. You catch them whispering about building a training perch shaped like a dragon. You don't shut it down. You just make a note to confiscate any torches. Behind the flare and feathers, you start to notice patterns in the falconers themselves. Some are career professionals like you, grizzled, methodical, unbothered by pomp. Others are hobbyists, rich enough to dabble and delegate the messy parts. A few are former soldiers, now turned to birds for their quiet, aerial battles. And then there are the monks. Yes, cloaked in browns and grays, faces serene as sunrise. A group of monastic falconers from a hilltop abbey, here not to compete but observe. They believe falconry brings them closer to divine order, the balance between nature and will, between sky and claw. One tells you, to guide a hawk is to understand humility. You smile politely and offer him dried rabbit jerky. Monastic falconry is a niche subject. Some argue monks raised the best birds due to their quiet, disciplined routines. Others say they just wanted excuses to spend time outside. Historians haven't quite agreed. But you will say this, the monk's hawks fly smoother than velvet and land without sound. It's impressive. And slightly eerie. Later that evening, after a particularly dramatic falconry round, complete with mid-air feathery collision and a dog stealing the lure, a small banquet unfolds in the torchlit hall. Stewed pears, roasted meats, too many sweet wines. Your apprentice gets mildly tipsy off cider and challenges a noble to a feather identifying contest. Somehow, he wins. The noble gifts him a silver clasp. You quietly confiscate it before he trades it for 3 sausages. You end the night in a borrowed guest room, half asleep, belly full. Outside, birds rest in their hoods, wings folded like parchment, the occasional flutter like a whisper. You think about all the roles falconers have filled: peacemakers, hunters, entertainers, monks, and now, consultants. You also consider how absurd it is that a career involving so many beaks and feathers could carry such prestige in the medieval world. But then again, humans will always be fascinated by what they can't naturally do: fly, strike from above, dominate the sky with nothing but a whistle. And maybe there's something noble in that pursuit. Or maybe it's just madness, tucked under a leather glove. Either way, you're in deep now. You wake with a stiff neck and a mouth that tastes faintly of goose. Somewhere nearby, a cock crows, not dramatically, like in a moralistic tale, but sort of like it stubbed its toe. The air in the guest chamber smells of rushes and last night's wine. Your apprentice is already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor, polishing a jess with a focus usually reserved for poetry or sword-making. You murmur a groggy, "Don't ruin it," and stretch until your knees creak. By midday, the tournament dissolves into cheerful farewells and much feather fluffing. Someone's bird ate someone else's bait bag, and two lords argue about it with surprisingly good manners. You and your apprentice hitch up the cart, coax your sleepy falcons into travel cages, and take the long road home, past hills that roll like stretched dough and villages that smell of damp hay and freshly mucked stables. Back at your home estate, a letter awaits, sealed with a wax falcon, naturally. It's from the court of a minor baron, inviting you to take on an extended contract as his personal falconry tutor. Not just for himself, though. His son is ready to learn the noble art, and they'd like to retain your services for the season. There's also mention of a good stipend, warm stables, and fewer screaming pages than usual. You groan. Court appointments mean less field time, more politics, and a lot more standing around while young nobles miss lures and blame the wind. But they also mean steady coin, food that didn't spend 5 days in a salted barrel, and the occasional soft mattress. Plus, you're curious what fewer screaming pages actually looks like in practice. You accept. And before long, you're packing again, guiding the apprentice through the well-rehearsed chaos of travel prep. Birds. Check. Gloves. Check. Bribes for the stablemaster in case things go wrong? Check. Check. And extra honey cakes. The baron's estate is larger than you expect. Gray stone towers loom above a sprawling courtyard filled with barking dogs, gossiping washerwomen, and, for some reason, a goat on a balcony. A servant leads you through a maze of halls that smell faintly of boiled cabbage and beeswax, and finally into a sun-drenched training yard. There, standing stiffly beside a wooden perch, is the baron's son. About 12 years old, wearing a tunic too clean for anything useful, and holding a falconer's glove like it's made of hot iron. You offer a smile. He tries one in return, but it melts halfway. The first lesson is all posture: how to stand without trembling, how to move with your arm firm but relaxed. It's a bit like teaching a table to pirouette, but after some failed glove drops and a mild pecking incident, the boy starts to relax. You hand him a merlin, small, calm, unlikely to go for his nose. Each day settles into a rhythm. Mornings in the mews, afternoons on the lawn with practice flights, evenings cleaning jesses and reinforcing perches. The baron sometimes watches from the balcony, nodding gravely as though he's judging a joust. His court whispers about you, a mix of admiration, suspicion, and the usual complaints about the smell. You're not offended. Falcons don't bathe. Neither do nobles, half the time. You soon learn the baron is part of a trend. Court falconry was a mark of sophistication across medieval Europe. It wasn't just for hunting, it was for power theater. To own a goshawk was to say, "I can command death from the sky and still have time to attend 3 feasts this week." One night, over spiced wine and roasted pigeon, a steward leans in and mutters, "You know the baron's father once traded a trained tiercel for a whole manor house?" You blink. Either that's an exaggeration or the manor came with very disappointing plumbing. Historians still argue whether some of these transactions were real or part of falconry lore inflated over time. Regardless, falcons were currency, living, screeching, occasionally rebellious currency. A well-trained bird could elevate a low-ranking noble's standing, or ruin a dinner party if it decided to snatch a roast mid-blessing. Your apprentice adapts quickly to court life. He starts wearing his hair differently and, disturbingly, picks up courtly phrases like "mayhap" and "verily." You catch him trying to charm a lady-in-waiting by naming feathers. She seems more amused than impressed, but he counts it as progress. The baron's son improves too. Within weeks, he's handling a kestrel without flinching, reading wind currents with something like intuition. You even catch him whispering to the bird, a habit you never taught him but one you recognize as a good sign. Or a slippery slope to naming all his hawks after fairy tale characters. Still, not everything goes smoothly. One afternoon, a sparrowhawk bolts mid-flight, shoots into a window, and lands in the bishop's soup. There's a lot of flailing, some light cursing, and one ruined tunic. You apologize profusely, though the bishop takes it in good humor and jokingly asks if you're available to train birds for divine punishment. During a feast in your honor, read, in the falcon's honor, a visiting noble tries to one-up your display by releasing his own, specially trained hawk. It immediately flies to the rafters and refuses to come down until someone offers it cheese. You hold your laughter until dessert. Barely. The longer you stay, the more you become part of the machinery. Half courtier, half bird wrangler, fully exhausted. You answer endless questions, from, "Can they see ghosts?" "No," to, "Could one carry a baby?" Also no, "Please stop asking." The most unexpected part? You start to like it. Not the pomp or the politics, but the teaching. Watching the boy light up when a hawk lands just right. Seeing your apprentice actually explain a knot without fumbling. Realizing that maybe, just maybe, you're part of a longer chain, passing knowledge forward like a feather in the wind. You even start jotting down your methods, training notes, diagrams, occasional rants about glove thickness. Maybe one day it'll become a guidebook. Or at least some entertaining parchment for a future falconer to laugh over. And in all this, you're reminded of something oddly reassuring. No matter the wealth, the court, the titles, everyone's bird still poops at the worst possible moment. The spring rains begin with little warning, and suddenly your world smells of wet feathers, old leather, and the endless damp wool of aristocratic cloaks. The training yard becomes a sea of slick mud, and your hawks, bless them, act like they've been personally insulted by the clouds. One refuses to fly. Another sulks on the glove. The apprentice slides dramatically in the muck and claims he's invented a new falconer's dance. You offer him a rag and zero applause. Yet the schedule remains, rain or shine. The Baron expects progress, and the boy, his son, is finally showing signs of real promise. He no longer stiffens when the talons curl around his wrist. He reads the raptor's body language like it's a secret code written just for him. You'd be proud, if not for the nagging feeling that he might soon outgrow his interest in birds and redirect it towards something more courtly, like fencing, poetry, or brooding by windows. One evening, while repairing a damaged lure, a courier arrives with a message sealed in wax, an invitation from a neighboring duke to demonstrate falconry at his midsummer hunt. Apparently, word of your courtroom hawksmanship has spread. The Baron, of course, insists you go. It reflects well on us all, he says, beaming as if he'd trained the hawks himself. So, you pack again. This time, the Baron's son comes too, along with your ever-eager apprentice, and an excessive number of footmen who argue about rope arrangements and feather alignment. The cart groans under the weight of cages, feed, grooming tools, and enough dried meats to survive an accidental siege. The Duke's estate is not so much a manor as a flex. It sprawls across the horizon with turrets like raised eyebrows, a courtyard that echoes like a cathedral, and gardens manicured with near-hostile precision. Peacocks strut everywhere, looking mildly offended by your birds. You find a temporary mews set up near the stables, which smell less like horses and more like rosewater and ambition. The demonstration is scheduled for the second day. You spend the first pacing the field, mapping wind patterns, and giving your birds motivational speeches. The Baron's son asks if hawks dream. You answer, probably, and if so, they dream of eating duchesses' lapdogs. He laughs, but you catch a courtier nearby looking scandalized. The morning of the hunt arrives with golden sunlight and enough noble titles to fill a small scroll. Lords and ladies fan themselves as they sip something chilled and unnecessary. The Duke himself arrives on a white horse, because of course he does. He wears a falconer's glove, though it's clear he hasn't used it for anything besides dramatic hand gestures. You step into the field, the Baron's son beside you. The falcon sits poised on your glove, muscles taut, eyes focused, regal in a way no crown could replicate. You whisper the command. The bird launches, slicing the air like a sharpened sigh. It dives, wheels, climbs again. A flawless performance. Nobles applaud, the Duke claps so long you wonder if his hand's asleep, and someone starts writing a poem on the spot. You resist the urge to bow. But then, of course, comes the chaos. A rival falconer, who you suspect was bribed by someone desperate for drama, releases a hawk too early. The bird collides mid-air with yours, feathers rain down like confetti, and your falcon veers off course, heading straight for the Duke's hat. In slow motion, you watch it snatch the plumed monstrosity clean off and drop it squarely in a goblet of mead. A long silence follows. Then laughter, first from a lady near the Duke, then spreading like spilled wine across the crowd. The Duke himself grins, lifts his drink, hat floating inside, and declares it a blessing of the skies. Disaster avoided. Somehow, you're more respected than before. Or at least feared. Historians still argue whether the event was remembered as a great falconry triumph or a nobleman's fashion crisis. Later that evening, you're summoned to the Duke's solar. He's lounging in a velvet chair, the hat freshly dried and now adorned with a tiny falcon feather, yours, you're pretty sure. He praises your skill, mentions how his own birds could use some firm direction, and offers you a generous stipend to stay on as royal falconer. You hesitate. It's tempting, wealth, status, better cheese, but you think of your muse back home, the way the wind curves through the hills, the quiet satisfaction of training without someone constantly narrating your worth. And you think of the Baron's son, who's waiting outside, still cradling a sleepy kestrel. You decline. Politely, of course. The Duke raises an eyebrow, then smiles like someone who understands. The best hawks, he says, don't stay caged. On the ride back, the boy chatters endlessly. About the crowd, the flight, the Duke's hat. He keeps practicing lure swings with a scarf, nearly whacking the apprentice in the eye. You don't stop him. There's something satisfying in his joy, something whole. Back at the Baron's estate, life resumes. The mews are familiar now, like an old quilt. You patch a few nets, trim jesses, and start writing down more of your techniques. The apprentice finds your notes and begins copying them, messily, into his own journal. You pretend not to notice. At the next feast, the Baron toasts the master of sky and glove, and you get a little roasted duck and a lot of awkward applause. Someone asks if you'll open a falconry school. You consider it. You really do. Because by now, this isn't just a job. It's a legacy. A strange, wind-bitten, feathery legacy. And you realize the curious career path of a medieval falconer isn't just about birds. It's about learning to read silence, to trust instinct, to balance pride and humility on a gloved hand. And, of course, to laugh when your bird steals a duke's hat. And as the fire crackles beside you that night, and a kestrel sleeps with its head tucked under wing, you think, maybe you've chosen the right perch after all. The Baron's son continues his training, and now you're no longer surprised when he outpaces your apprentice. The boy has grace with the birds, not just in motion, but in empathy. He senses their moods, corrects their flights with gentle shifts, and even hums to them, which you used to mock, until a particularly moody goshawk visibly relaxed when he sang that off-key harvest song. He's nearly a falconer in his own right now, and you begin delegating the more tedious morning tasks, cleaning the mews, measuring grain, untangling jesses that mysteriously knot themselves overnight. The apprentice, not to be outdone, tries to show off by crafting a new lure weighted with carved antler. It flies crooked, smacks the back of your head, and is quickly demoted to perch ornament. Meanwhile, your reputation has grown wings. Nobles from neighboring lands request visits, some wanting training, others just to say they met the falconer who wouldn't work for a duke. A parchment arrives one morning bearing a royal seal. You read it, raise one eyebrow, and immediately pour yourself some cider. Turns out, someone wants you to consult on a falconry manuscript for the royal library. Not train, not entertain, just share your wisdom. Of course, this summons involves travel. Again. You prep a smaller team this time. Just yourself, the apprentice, the Baron's son, and one extremely judgmental falcon named Bramble who has mastered the art of side-eye. Your horses plod down the winding roads, hooves muffled by early spring moss and occasional poetic birdsong you pretend not to notice. The royal scribe turns out to be a twitchy fellow with ink-smudged sleeves and a nervous laugh. He insists on documenting everything, every movement, phrase, and bird-related grunt. When you explain how falcons can hunt even when half-blinded, he gasps like you've revealed a state secret. He scribbles down falcon eye resilience and asks if he can quote you. You tell him only if he improves your teeth in the final illustrations. Over the course of a week, you pose with birds, explain feeding schedules, demonstrate tethering techniques, and spend several hours trying to convince a hawk not to poop on an illuminated manuscript. The scribe sketches you heroically, but draws the birds like winged turnips. You decide to take it as a compliment. At night, you gather with a few other tradespeople in the great hall. There's a candlemaker who swears beeswax affects dream quality, a cook experimenting with cinnamon in mead, and a blacksmith who can't stop talking about hinges. You listen politely and offer a story or two, usually involving feathers in soup or noblemen fainting at talon scratches. They laugh. You realize it's been a while since you sat like this, among strangers who don't care about titles or lineage. Just about work, done well. One evening, you find the apprentice alone by the aviary, sketching a peregrine mid-flight. He doesn't see you watching. There's a quiet pride in how his hands move, still clumsy, but confident. You wonder if, one day, he'll take your place, not just because you're aging or sore, but because this world deserves someone who still gets starry-eyed about feathers. As the days pass, you sense it's time to head back. The manuscript is nearly done, your birds are restless, and you've eaten too many dinners with parsley garnish shaped like griffins. You say your goodbyes, offer the scribe a few last-minute facts, and warn him not to invent any dramatic duels with owls, then begin the long ride home. And home, when you arrive, feels different. The mews smell the same, straw, old wood, the faint tang of meat, but you notice how much more organized everything is. The apprentice took the initiative. Even labeled the perches. He misspelled Merlin, but you don't mention it. The Baron greets you with a nod and a question about partridge numbers this season. You answer without thinking, then catch the boy slipping a treat to Bramble. The falcon accepts it and doesn't bite. Progress. You return to your routine, but a little slower now. Your shoulders ache more. The wind cuts sharper than it used to. You write down more of your notes, not just for training but for philosophy, on patience, instinct, and the maddening habit of birds to molt precisely when you need them sleekest. Word spreads that the royal manuscript will be displayed in the winter. You're invited to attend, but you politely decline. You've had enough velvet halls for one life. Instead, you host your own showing, a quiet flight in the hills, with just your students, a few villagers, and a hawk that's learned to swoop in perfect spirals. The crowd applauds softly. You're content. One morning, you rise early and find the apprentice already awake, whittling a new perch from ash wood. The Baron's son sits beside him, holding the nails. They argue about the angle, both pretending not to care what you think, but clearly waiting for your judgment. You nod once. That's enough. Historians still argue whether falconers were ever truly respected among knights and clergy. Some say they were servants, others that they were whisperers of wind and claw. You've stopped caring what they decide. Because somewhere between training birds to hunt and dodging royal invitations, you became something else. Mentor, storyteller, keeper of the feathered strange. And as you sit, watching a kestrel test the wind, you think maybe, just maybe, this strange looping life of yours has been something worth soaring through. The seasons spiral on, each one adding a new layer to the rhythm of your days. Spring bursts in with fledglings and the nervous rustle of new feathers. Summer trails long, golden evenings full of crisp air and sharp-eyed hawks slicing the sky. Autumn smells of earth and molt, as birds shed and sulk and demand extra patience. Winter, well, winter is for mending, for storytelling, for the slow breathing of the muse under thick snow. You've watched 3 generations of birds come and go. Some flew so fast and far you half believed they dissolved into the clouds. Others lingered past their prime, still swooping low and noble, even as their bones creaked like yours. Bramble, your famously cranky falcon, finally passed 2 winters ago. Quietly, in her sleep, head tucked beneath her wing like always. You buried her near the hills, where the wind was strongest. Your apprentice, though he hasn't been that in a long while, now runs most of the training. He's good. More than good. Sometimes, when you watch him release a hawk, the arc of the bird and the soft lift of his hand are so seamless, so identical to yours at his age, that you forget who's who. And the Baron's son? Well, he never became a poet, thank goodness. He's a knight now. Still visits. Still asks if you have any kestrels with personality. You still handle the difficult birds. The ones no one else quite understands. The ones that won't sit still, won't eat properly, won't fly until the moon is out. You always had a soft spot for the feathered weirdos. Maybe it takes one to train one. And now there's always talk, of a falconry academy. Not some royal vanity project, but a real one. Built into the hillside. Open to anyone with patience, a glove, and a tolerance for bird droppings in their hair. The Baron's considering funding it. You're considering mentoring. From a chair. With tea. Supervised. One morning, you get a letter. A real one, with a wax seal and ornate flourishes you can barely read anymore. It's from the scribe, the one with the turnip drawings of falcons. He's now the royal librarian. The manuscript you helped inspire? It's become the cornerstone of the kingdom's falconry archives. He invites you to come see it, but this time with no tasks, no lectures. Just as a guest of honor. You don't reply right away. Instead, you walk to the mews, brush a sleeping owl's feathers with your fingers, and look out over the field where so many birds have vanished into the horizon. You think about your first days, how clumsy you were, how lost and unsure. And how the birds, somehow, still responded. Still flew. Historians still argue whether falconers shaped history or merely flitted along its margins. Whether they were craftsmen or caretakers. Some dismiss them entirely, calling their work decorative or ceremonial. But those scholars, you'd wager, never stared into the eye of a raptor and felt it understand them. They never knew what it was like to coax trust from something wild. You sit now more than you stand. Your gloves are soft from use, your boots cracked, your hands lined like dried riverbeds. But your eyes are as sharp as ever. And when the wind stirs, you still lift your hand slightly, as if readying for the weight of a bird. The memory of talons, that slight pressure, it never quite leaves. Tonight, the stars blink overhead. You sit beside the mews, the sky too clear for sleep. Somewhere nearby, a young falcon screams at a mouse and misses by several feet. You smile. You'll fix that tomorrow. But for now, you close your eyes and listen. The world is quieter than it's ever been. You've flown the long arc of your curious career, from anonymous stable help to reluctant teacher to legend in a manuscript, sketched like a hero, even if your birds upstaged you at every turn. And as the night settles its cool hands over your shoulders, you think, this life, this odd, glorious, feather-laced life, was never boring after all. Now, you breathe slower. Let the air settle gently in your chest, like feathers floating downward, quiet and weightless. The sounds of the mews fade into hush, no rustling, no wing beats, just the distant whisper of wind curling around stone. The moon hangs like a pale coin above the trees, its light soft as old parchment. Even the stars seem to blink slower now, as if drowsy. You sit back against the hay-stuffed bench in your corner of the mews. The air smells faintly of straw, oiled leather, and sleep. You can still feel the ghost of a falcon's weight on your glove, even though your hands are empty. That memory stays with you, soft and certain. The birds are asleep, their heads tucked, their bodies rising and falling with each quiet breath. No more training tonight. No more expectations. Just the stillness of a world long known, perfectly quiet and gently fading to black. Whatever path brought you here, through mud, through cold, through sunlight blazing across open fields, it's done its work. You've left your mark, not just in ink or feathers, but in every gentle release of a bird into the sky. That's a legacy. That's enough. Now, close your eyes. Let the quiet wrap around you like a warm wool cloak. You've earned your rest. Sleep deep. Sleep soft. You are home.